Dolan tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GBNews, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to GB News. You're watching Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, on your TV, radio and online. This show is all about championing common sense, and today we will be discussing the history and importance of remembrance, our first Remembrance Sunday without Her Majesty the Queen. And we will debate, should people feel obliged to wear a poppy? First, here's a check on the latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. His Majesty King Charles has led the Remembrance Sunday service today for the first time as sovereign following the death of his mother, the late Queen. Both His Majesty the King and the Prince of Wales laid a wreath of poppies at the Cenotaph in central London just after 11 o'clock this morning, the wreath incorporating a ribbon which paid tribute to his late mother and grandfather, King George, by using their horse racing colours. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, and former Prime Ministers were also there, as well as 10,000 Royal British Legion veterans representing different parts of the armed forces, taking part in a march past to honour the war dead. And joining a further 10,000 members of the public lining the streets of Whitehall to watch on and pay their own respects. Well, the entire nation fell silent to honour those fallen in a line of duty at 11 o'clock this morning. Recently renovated Big Ben chiming 11 times at 11 o'clock to mark the start of the nationwide 2-minute silence observed up and down the country. Bells ringing to commemorate all those who lost their lives in conflicts past and present. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace commemorating the fallen of the past, but also paying tribute to Ukrainians currently fighting for their freedom.
Today is a reminder that we've suffered wars in Europe before, and tens of thousands of British service personnel gave their lives as did civilians to defeat fascism. And here we are again, tragically, decades later, with a war on continental Europe and Ukraine. What Remembrance is about is recognising that freedom isn't free. People make sacrifices. This nation made the ultimate sacrifice on 2 occasions in the Great Wars, but also on other conflicts since, and Remembrance is a time to reflect on that.
Ben Wallace, well, the Prime Minister's plane, we understand, has just taken off to travel to the G20 summit in Indonesia, where he's going to be calling out Putin's regime over the war in Ukraine. Rishi Sunak will be joining the annual gathering of world leaders, saying this year's meeting will not be business as usual, with the focus instead on how countries can work together to tackle global security challenges as well as economic hard times ahead. President Putin, it's understood, will miss the event and send his Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov instead. Here, the Chancellor has warned there'll be very difficult decisions ahead of his upcoming budget on Thursday. Jeremy Hunt warning that taxes will rise following his statement to the House of Commons as he tries to balance the public books. He's thought to be considering a range of options, including an extended freeze on income tax and national insurance thresholds. Labour says further austerity is not the way forward. Meanwhile, Ukraine's president has described the fighting in the eastern region of Donetsk as hell. Volodymyr Zelensky has praised the country's forces defending the region in what he says are fierce daily battles. Meanwhile, celebrations in the city of Kherson continue. That was liberated from Russian control this week. But President Zelensky says Moscow destroyed all key national infrastructure before retreating, including communications, water supply and electricity. In the United States, President Joe Biden says he is pleased with the election turnout after Democrats retained a majority control of the Senate in the midterms. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto won the election in Nevada, which tipped the balance for the Democrats. They'll control at least 50 Senate seats, with Vice President Kamala Harris able to break ties in the chamber. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has admitted the results were somewhat disappointing. The anticipated red tsunami materialising into a red trickle. Votes are still being counted in the lower house. Republicans currently in the lead for the House of Representatives. Now, here, the number of migrants who've crossed the English Channel in small boats this year has so far surpassed 41,000. GB News understands around 300 migrants have been taken to Dover Harbour today alone after attempting the journey. Border Force vessels and RNLI lifeboats are also responding to a number of other small boat sightings off the Kent coast today. Meanwhile, Downing Street says talks on a deal with France over the Channel crossings are in the final stages. Now, a group of MPs has accused Ofgem of failing to effectively regulate energy suppliers and leaving households to foot a bill of £2.7 billion. The Public Accounts Committee found that despite instability among energy retailers in 2018, Ofgem didn't tighten fiscal requirements until last year. The committee says Ofgem did not strike the right balance between promoting energy competition and ensuring financial resilience. Sport and England have been crowned T20 cricket world champions in Melbourne after beating Pakistan by 5 wickets. Ben Stokes was England's hero once again, taking them over the line with an over to spare. The victory marking the second time the T has won the T20 World Cup, and they're now the first to hold both global white ball trophies, having won the 50-over World Cup in 2019. Congratulations to them. You're with GB News, more news as it happens. I'm back in half an hour.
Hello and welcome. Here's what's coming up this afternoon. We unite across faiths, cultures and backgrounds to remember the service and sacrifice of our war dead. David Starkey and Jonathan Riley will join me as we remember the sacrifice of the armed forces community from Britain and the Commonwealth. And our royal reporter Cameron Roberts takes a look back at our first Remembrance Sunday without Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And later on, Armed Forces Minister James Heappey says he worries that wearing poppies has become an obligation forced on people out of fear. We shall debate if there is a poppy-shaming culture. And of course, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. Deus Volt. Today is Remembrance Sunday, and people from across the UK and the Commonwealth came together this morning to hold a 2-minute silence to honour those who made the ultimate sacrifice. Royal Marine buglers sounded the last post at the cenotaph, and wreaths were laid by members of the royal family, political party leaders, former prime ministers, military figures and representatives from Commonwealth nations. His Majesty King Charles III led the commemorations at the cenotaph in what was his first Remembrance Sunday since the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. I am now joined by historian Dr. David Starkey and retired British Army officer and military historian Lieutenant General Jonathan Riley. Thank you both for joining me today. Dr. Starkey, I'll start with you if you don't mind. Could you start off by telling us a little bit about the history of Remembrance Sunday and why it still holds so much significance in the UK and abroad?
Well, listen, Calvin, to what you just heard. Those 11 strikes of Big Ben. They commemorate the moment, the literal moment, of the end of the First World War, which ended on I remembered as a child, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. And remember, it's a war the Secretary of State for Defense, Ben Wallace, produced a terrible underestimate. He said tens of thousands dead. In the First World War, it's 1 million dead. It is unspeakable horror that hit every town, village, community in the country. What's extraordinary is that the real nature of Remembrance Sunday, we now see it as grand, official, royal. It begins as popular. It begins because the people wanted it, because none of those million bodies were brought home. They lay where they fell in the wonderful war ceremonies, cemeteries that were built afterwards. So there was this terrible sense of emptiness. People hadn't been able to mourn. They wanted somewhere where they could mourn. And what happened in 1919, to celebrate the peace, there was a monument erected. It was temporary. It was a wooden and plaster structure by the great architect Sir Edwin Lutyens, and it took this name. Remember, I said no bodies came back. It took the Greek name cenotaph, which means an empty tomb. And it was originally put there for a grand ceremony, actually of celebration. In July, immediately after the dreadful peace treaties at Versailles and the Trianon, which tore apart German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the end of the Russian Empire, and so on. But what happened was, as the monument sat there through the summer and the autumn, people gathered. And on the 11th of November, 1919, the crowds turned up, and they came with wreaths, and they cried, and they mourned. And it became official then, as it were. It's rather like Princess Diana. The people led. There was something you will understand, Calvin. This is a sort of sainthood. It's a holy place. People come to lay things, and then the whole thing is made official. The grand panjandarum of ceremony at the time, the Foreign Secretary, the wonderful Marquis Curzon, Lord Curzon, takes the thing over. Lutyens turns it into the magnificent permanent structure we see there. And from 1920 onwards, the ceremony becomes formalized. And then in 1921, we add the poppy, and the whole thing rolls forward. But we don't get to, and I'll shut up in a second, we don't get to Remembrance Sunday, actually, until the Second World War. This is something very striking. In the Second World War, productivity was thought so important that we stopped celebrating on the 11th because it's a weekday, and we shift it to a Sunday.
And I love that it started organically. We laid a wreath at church this morning, obviously, and I love that that started from the people before it became an official ceremony. Lieutenant General Riley, the late Queen considered Remembrance Sunday one of the most important days in the royal calendar. Why do you think that was?
Well, she herself, of course, had served in uniform in the Second World War, and her father had served in the First World War. And other members of the family as well. Her father's brother had been killed in an air crash, and she had first-hand knowledge of it. She was also, of course, closely involved with the armed forces. She was colonel-in-chief of some regiments, including my own, and maintained a close connection with the military. And so she was very aware of the continuing losses in conflict in modern times, and until the end of the campaign in Afghanistan, there'd only been 1 year since, I think, 1886, when a British soldier was not killed on operations somewhere in the world, and that was 1968. And so I think for the Queen, as for many of us who were born after the wars, Remembrance Sunday is just as much about sacrifice on behalf of freedom in modern times as it was back then, as David rightly pointed out.
Absolutely. And Professor Starkey, this is obviously King Charles III's first Remembrance Sunday since the death of his mother. Did this morning's ceremony differ in any way to when the late Queen did it?
Only very slightly. And I must say, I found, dare I say it, a little incongruous that we commemorate her by her racing colours. I know she loved racing, but it's an odd way of doing it. But again, it's the problem. How do you, in a sense, with royal ceremony, which is so fixed, how do you differentiate? Clearly, that colour of the ribbon is one way of doing it. But can I just add one thing to why it's so central to the monarchy?
Of course.
Remember, First World War was actually fought in the name of the king and country. I have a plaque downstairs which commemorates my uncle Abraham, of course I never knew, who died at Gallipoli as a very young man, with his engagement letter and photograph folded in his pocket. And to every soldier who fell, there was given this extraordinary, rather beautiful, very much in the same manner as Lutyens, this bronze plaque with a great lion and a mourning Britannia on it, with for king and country. And so the monarchy, is the symbol. Remember, and fear that our general may bristle a little bit, there isn't such a thing as a British nation. There is a crown, there is a United Kingdom, and the monarchy lies at the heart as the only genuine universal symbol. And the Queen was passionately, profoundly aware of that, as of course is King Charles. So it's this desire for the monarchy as symbol. Remember, in the Second World War, just to vary it a little, George VI was not a little jealous of Churchill when he starts to appear as the national symbol. And you remember there's a wonderful moment of competition at D-Day when Churchill, in very Boris Johnson mode, said, I'm going to go. And the king stops him very simply by saying, Mr. Churchill, your name is not yet Sir Winston, if you go, I go, which stopped it. So it's this role of the monarchy as the ultimate symbol. But again, it has to be a popular symbol, because what's also very striking, and we'll be talking, Calvin, I think, a lot about these things, what the First World War saw was the complete rejigging of the monarchy as that strange paradox, that ultimate British paradox, a democratic monarchy. In 1917, at the height of the First World War, when, remember, there's real fear of Red Revolution, you completely invented that other central act to which the Queen was so committed, the investiture. You invent the Order of the British Empire to honour those who have served in the war, those who've served in the vastly expanded bureaucracy, and the first investiture, again, this sense of the populism of the thing. The first investiture of the Order of the British Empire doesn't take place in Buckingham Palace. It doesn't take place in a grand ballroom. It takes place in Ibrox Park Football Stadium in Glasgow. And so, you have a monarchy which is consciously adjusting to democracy, to the arrival of in the years that we're commemorating, remember, between 1919 and 1922. This is when the Lloyd George coalition falls. With that, there is the death of the Liberal Party and there is the rise of the Labour Party. And so many of those soldiers would be the voters for the Labour Party. And the monarchy is profoundly, deeply aware of that fact.
I think we should also be aware of how much has changed since then. I can't imagine a Prime Minister fighting for king and country this day and age. That's remarkable that was acceptable and a given. Lieutenant General Riley, as a former soldier yourself, what does Remembrance Sunday mean to you? And can you encapsulate maybe some of the conflicts that we remember on Remembrance Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, as a small boy, of course, it was for me all about the First and Second World Wars. And I can remember turning up at the cenotaph as a boy. And my father's and my grandfather's generations were all there. And they'd all seen war service. And a lot of them had an absolutely wonderful time and wished it was still going on. But at the same time, it was a moment of sadness to reflect on the sacrifice that their friends and brothers had made. And everybody wore a poppy because the war or the wars was very much in people's minds. And they were very much aware that the poppy symbolized the debt of gratitude for our freedom, for our liberties that had been bought so dearly by so many people. And the further away we get, the danger is that the less that resonates. Of course, since I joined the military myself, I've lost friends and subordinates in campaigns, starting with, in my case, Northern Ireland. And I think we've forgotten in recent years, or perhaps deliberately so, just how difficult and dangerous Northern Ireland was. An awful lot of civilians died. But in 1972, we lost more members of the security forces, police and military, than in the campaigns in the Balkans, Sierra Leone, Iraq and Afghanistan put together. And those people were often in our thoughts and minds, soldiers in my own battalion who'd been killed. And then, of course, after the end of the Cold War, I was on operations in the Balkans, in Sierra Leone, and more latterly in Iraq and Afghanistan, where the immediacy of the broadcast media, as in America with the Vietnam War, brought those casualties right into people's homes immediately. And when I was out there in command, I tried to go to every repatriation ceremony, and it was always a deeply touching moment. And we were all just hoping that our comrades were not being killed for nothing, that we would be able to leave Afghanistan a better place than we found it. And one of the striking things I remember was how deeply affected the bearer parties always were when the last thing they could do for their mate was carry his coffin onto the aircraft, and they were always absolutely distraught after that was over. And you could see that hope and fear written in their faces.
That's really heartwarming. That's quite touching. My father also served in Northern Ireland. He was at church this morning. I couldn't be more proud. But I also understand that your regiment was involved in the creation of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier.
Not directly. King George V was Colonel-in-Chief of the regiment, and had been so since he was Prince of Wales in 1901, and was very close to the regiment because, of course, until 1915 there were no Welsh Guards. And the medal room in Carnarvon Castle is our memorial to him and King George VI. And there we have his uniforms and the First World War colours, and a large number of medals. But we also have the ironwork from the coffin of the unknown soldier. There were two coffins made. There was a trial run and then the real one. And the ironwork was made at the Brunswick Iron Foundry in Carnarvon. And the trial run was then lodged with us. And so if you're in North Wales on holiday, pop in and have a look, and you'll see it. You'll see it there as a piece of living history.
Professor Starkey, where else is Remembrance Sunday celebrated? Because it's not just in Great Britain, is it?
No, it is, of course, profoundly important in the whole Commonwealth. Remember, we won both wars, not because we fought alone. There is this great myth, England stood alone. It didn't. It had an empire. And if you actually go, we've talked now about remembrance in England. Go to Ypres in Belgium. Go and look at the Menin Gate in Ypres. It's one of the greatest, the noblest, the most moving structures. And you look, it's simply this vast arch with inscribed on it the name of every soldier who died in the area. And there are tens and tens of thousands. They are Indian. They are West Indies. They are Canadian. They are Australian. They are New Zealand. And remember, for so many of those men, they were very recent immigrants from Britain. My uncles, my great uncles on my mother's side, they just left Oldham to go to work in Ontario, in Canada, at a very, very similar town that was emerging in cotton, and they join up. And you know what? It's the strangest things. These were Oldham boys. They found themselves recruited. They both survived, happily. They found themselves recruited into the Canadian Highlands. So I have the photographs of these lads, fresh from the Oldham mill, looking a bit plumper because they've been better fed in Canada, wearing full Highland dress. But in the Commonwealth, remember, it is remembrance too. And we talk again, we were talking about the poppy. The poppy doesn't come from Britain. The poppy begins in America, and it's more fully developed in Canada. And when I was appearing last week with Mark Stein, Mark was complaining bitterly because there we are, because the Canadian poppy is much nicer than the tiresome Brit poppy, which is this awful paper thing. And again, what's also striking, both of you, is the poppy begins not as an official thing.
I'm afraid I've run out of time, Professor Starkey. But
it begins as a popular movement. It's tough.
I honestly could listen to this history story all day. It's very fascinating and very relevant. So thank you both very, very much. That was retired British Army officer and military historian Lieutenant General Jonathan Riley and Professor Dr. David Starkey. Thanks for your time. Plenty more to come this afternoon. After the break, our royal reporter Cameron Roberts takes a look back at our Remembrance Sunday without Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. But first, let's take a look at the weather.
And looking ahead to this afternoon, the UK's looking dry with sunny spells for most, becoming wet and windy from the west. Let's take a look at the detail. Dry and sunny across parts of western Scotland, but cloudier in the east with patchy rain at times. Windy in the west and over high ground, highs of around 12 degrees. A slow-moving band of heavy rain moving eastwards across Northern Ireland. Drier in the east, sunny spells, breezy and highs of 15. Cloudy with sunny spells across northern England, a chance of drizzle in the east, breezy at western coasts and high of 16, and dry across Wales with sunny spells, scattered showers and low cloud lingering over high ground. Very cloudy across the Midlands today, any sunny spells mostly confined to the south and east, light southeasterly winds, mild in any sunshine, highs of 15. And a generally dry day across most of East Anglia with plenty of prolonged sunshine, light winds, although a bit breezy on the coast, highs of 15. And remaining dry across the south of England today, patchy cloud, prolonged sunny intervals, light winds, breezy on the coast, high of 16. Staying dry in the east then, but a band of heavy rain and strong winds slowly moving eastwards, and that is how the weather is shaping up.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Welcome back to Common Sense Crusade on GB News, on TV, online and on your digital radio. As we've just been discussing, this year's Remembrance Sunday commemorations will be particularly poignant. It was the first since the death of Queen Elizabeth II and the first that King Charles III will lead as monarch. As our GB News reporter, royal correspondent Cameron Walker now explains.
The changing of the guard. Just 9 weeks after the Queen passed away, King Charles will lead the nation in remembrance for the first time as King. A moving moment, according to royal author Katie Nicholl.
I think it will be a really poignant reminder to all of us watching, and particularly to the veteran community, that she's not here anymore. And it will be these moments, these points in the calendar where we're just so used to seeing the Queen. We're going to have to get used to having King Charles instead. And I think Remembrance Sunday is going to be one of those really nostalgic and important moments.
The late Queen was the last surviving member of the royal family to have served in the Second World War. Now her descendants will be out in force at the cenotaph to honour the millions who sacrificed their lives for our freedom. A new wreath, its ribbon bearing the King's racing colours, will be laid by His Majesty for the first time. It's expected to pay tribute to his grandfather and mother. The Queen Consort is expected to view the service from the Foreign Office balcony, and a royal household equerry will lay a wreath on her behalf. Racing colours inherited from Camilla's grandfather will echo a wreath from a previous Queen Consort, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. It's the Poppy Factory based in Richmond that has made Their Majesty's wreaths, along with 100,000 others delivered across the country. A nation united in honouring the fallen. Perhaps reflecting his commitments to the Welsh people, the Prince of Wales's wreath bears a new ribbon in Welsh red. It was previously laid by his father, featuring the Prince of Wales's feathers. Buckingham Palace has announced a long list of royals expected to attend the service, including the Princess of Wales, expected to appear on the balcony. The world wars may be confined to history books, but the war in Ukraine rages on.
Such truly terrible aggression.
As Prince of Wales, Charles publicly showed his support for Ukrainians across the Commonwealth. In an uncertain world, many look to the monarchy for stability. Cameron Walker, GB News.
You are with GB News on TV, online and radio. After the break and later on, Armed Forces Minister James Heappey says he worries that wearing poppies has become an obligation forced on people out of fear. We shall debate if there is a poppy shaming culture. Now it's time for a check on the news headlines.
And the headlines this hour from the GB newsroom. King Charles III has led the Remembrance Sunday service for the first time as sovereign following the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth. Both the King and the Prince of Wales laid a poppy wreath at the cenotaph in central London this morning. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer and former Prime Ministers also in attendance at the cenotaph, as well as 10,000 Royal British Legion veterans representing 300 different parts of the armed forces taking part in a march to honour their fallen comrades, and a further 10,000 members of the public lining the route to Whitehall to watch on and pay their own tribute. And the Prime Minister using the upcoming G20 summit to call out Putin's regime over the war in Ukraine today. Rishi Sunak's joining other world leaders in Indonesia, and he says this year's meeting will not be business as usual, with the focus instead on how countries can work together to solve global security issues and economic challenges. The Russian president expected to miss the event and send his foreign minister instead. And here the Chancellor has warned there will be very difficult decisions ahead of his upcoming autumn budget. Jeremy Hunt saying taxes will rise following his statement to the House on Thursday as he tries to balance the public books. He's thought to be considering a range of options, including an extended freeze on income tax and national insurance thresholds. And the number of people crossing the English Channel in small boats has now passed 41,000 this year. GB News has been told around 300 Channel migrants have been taken to Dover Harbour so far today. Border Force vessels and RNLI lifeboats are also responding to a number of other small boat sightings off the Kent coast. And those are your latest news headlines. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television and online, across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to Common Sense Crusade on GB News, on TV, online and on your wireless. When we think of Remembrance Sunday, the poppy is one of the first things that comes to mind. But Armed Forces Minister James Heappey said people should not be ashamed to be wearing one in the days leading up to Remembrance Sunday. Heappey, a former officer in the Rifles, said he would rather fewer people wore poppies if they understood what they symbolised than everyone being forced to wear one because Twitter went nuts if they didn't. So should people feel obliged to wear a poppy? Joining me now is Matthew Stadlen, broadcaster and political commentator, and Peter Whittle, director of the New Culture Forum. Thank you both for coming in. I appreciate it. Both wearing your poppies. I hope neither of you shamed the other one into wearing one. Well, let's start with you, Matthew. Should people feel obliged to wear a poppy?
I don't think they should feel obliged to wear a poppy, but I like the fact that we are all wearing poppies. I have to say, and you know I'm not a huge Tory supporter. I rather agree with James Heappey, the Armed Forces Minister, on this. The point about the poppy is that we, as individuals, but also as a society, collectively, remember the fallen. And the fact that we're having a conversation about this today is an opportunity to remind ourselves, if I've got my facts right, that 880,000 people, British people, forces, died in World War I in unspeakable conditions. 384,000 British forces died in World War II. Yeah. Many more civilians in World War II died than in World War I as well because of the Blitz. So I think all of those people who gave their lives for their country, in some cases maybe they were forced to give their lives because not necessarily everyone wanted to have to sign up, those people should be remembered because they gave an incalculable sacrifice.
OK, and Peter Whittle, where do you fall on this?
Well, absolutely. How can one disagree with that? I would say that what I find interesting is that I don't think, first of all, that there is huge pressure. And if there is pressure, then it's not working because there are many people walking about without poppies on. When the minister said something about people understanding what it's for, he'd rather that, then I agree. But that means that we've got to make sure that young people know actually what it's about. Yeah. And I very much doubt that they are taught that now. So there is a point to be made there. I think that on a broader point, I think it's become more important. And I sense that it is seen as more important now than, for example, when I was growing up and my parents used to watch it. And when you're younger and you think it's a bit boring and everything. But we took it for granted. I do think that there is a lot more at stake now. We're living in a time where basically our history is being, delegitimized in front of our very eyes all the time. Yes. So I think these things become far more important.
Yes.
I think it's really important at a time when we are looking at the negative parts of our history, and I would be one of the first to say we have to reflect on that, and we need to reflect on that far more than I did as a school student, that I was taught as a pupil. We've had a debate about this in the past. But it's really important while we're doing that, which is right, that we do remember the really good parts of our history. And one of the good parts of our history is that we stood up to Hitler. My grandfather on my father's side was a Jew. He was lucky to escape with his life. He was from Vienna. He was welcomed to this country, and he was always grateful to this country as a consequence. My grandfather on my mother's side won the Military Cross. He was one of Montgomery's aide-de-camp, one of his 6 aide-de-camps. He was a major in the British Army, worked his way up from peeling potatoes at the start of the war as a private, and ended up going on his motorbike right up to the German lines, helping prepare the ground and the intelligence for the D-Day landings. I'm enormously... he was a hero, and I'm enormously proud of him. I hope that if the same situation ever occurred again, that I would be as brave as my grandfather. Because so many of these generations have now died out, we have very, very few left survivors. It is all the more important that we remind our own children. I now have a 7-week-old that I certainly will bring him up to be aware of the sacrifice of his forefathers and the women involved as well. My mother's mother was a Wren in the British Navy, and she played her part too.
I think you both have some very good points about young people not understanding what this is all about, and we should teach them they have a debt of gratitude because there are fewer and fewer people who are still around who fought in World War II, and that's becoming an issue because living memories are changing. But it's not just about young people. I was stopped in a supermarket the other day, and the cashier didn't know what the poppy was because this person was from another country. Do we also have a problem in educating people who are coming to Britain?
Well, yes. I mean, first of all, I disagree that, you know, it's a good thing that finally we're talking about the bad things that happened in our past. I think I can't remember a time over the past 30 years when we haven't been talking about the bad things. If anything, it would be revolutionary to start celebrating British history at this stage.
You wouldn't celebrate the slave trade, would you, Peter? You would want us to be educated properly on that.
Who is
Well, that's a bad part of our history. We need to learn about that. We need to be talked about that.
However,
there are people who are coming out now of schools who think that's the only thing about British history. And I think that is intentional, actually. And I think that this sort of thing, commemorating remembrance, is hugely important because also there are other kind of forces, which is that somehow this glorifies war. You know, you've got people, I remember when I was on the London Assembly, for example, you had the Greens wearing white poppies, you know, to make a point, which I felt was profoundly...
James Heapy's a Conservative. He totally legitimises the white poppy. He says if people want to use the white poppy,
he can do that
fine.
if he likes, but frankly, I think it is insulting. I think it is morally sanctimonious because it's implying that the rest of us somehow are not quite as evolved and that somehow or other we are glorifying war. No, we are glorifying the people who died, quite rightly. The cenotaph says the glorious dead, and that's what we should continue to do. But young people, I think a lot of them, as you said as well, new arrivals in the country, will not know because an overarching cultural history of our country is no longer taught. The people who actually should be teaching it are vaguely ashamed of it. If the last few years have told us anything, it's that.
I'm not at school, and my son is too young to be at school. When he is at school, I hope, and I'll use platforms like this to encourage the position that we learn both about the extreme good that we did as a country in our past and the extreme bad. We cannot allow our children to grow up today without a knowledge of our intrinsic relationship in the past. Yes, we helped end the slave trade, but with the slave trade in the first place. Equally, and just as importantly, we have to make sure that our children are taught about the suffering and the sacrifice of our soldiers in the First World War and the incredible bravery of Winston Churchill in this capacity and those who fought under him and in the name of this country in standing up to the monstrosity of Hitler.
But that's a good point, because 1 in 5 Brits, young Brits at the moment, don't see Churchill as a hero, do they?
Well, he's both. He's both, because life is complicated. He's both. He did some bad stuff, he said some white supremacist stuff, but he also made sure that we stood up to Hitler. Unfortunately, life is complicated, and recognising life in its nuance is really important. Heroes are dangerous things. If we have heroes, we have to accept that they may not be perfect, because do either of you two gentlemen know a perfect human being?
Only one.
Nobody for a moment has ever said that Churchill was a perfect man. Nobody. That's never been claimed. I think it is outrageous to start talking about him spouting white supremacist stuff.
Why?
Because that term then was not even known. The fact is he was a product of his time.
Oh, so that was OK then?
No.
There weren't any anti-racists around then?
Nobody's saying that, Matt. The point is that basically only 1 in 5 young people, as Calvin just said, it came out this week, Policy Exchange, actually think Churchill is to be celebrated. Otherwise, they think that he is a racist and that he was more bad than good.
Peter, when I was growing up, I wasn't aware of his bad stuff.
What that really
I wasn't aware of the bad stuff, only the good stuff. It's better that we're... surely we want to be aware of history, of the truth. That's not what we're after, isn't it?
That is not the truth.
It is the truth.
There is a reason that people like Churchill are particularly attacked in the way that they are, and that is because they go to the very roots of what we are and our history. He is actually a symbol of British heroism, whatever else you might think, and history. So you go for those people. Those are the ones you go
Peter,
for.
So if you allow me to come back to you, I've been very, very clear about this. Hitler was a monster, and Churchill stood up to Hitler.
Absolutely.
My grandfather fought for Montgomery, who was our field marshal, the most senior military figure, certainly on land, under Churchill. I have enormous pride for that, and as I say, I hope if those circumstances were to recur, that I would be as brave as my grandfather. It is also true that Churchill said some white supremacist stuff. Some people blame him for a famine, the Bengal famine. We need, if we are interested in being accurate, if we're interested in the truth, if we're interested in facts, we need to study our history in all its sometimes difficult complexity. To simply brush that under the carpet will not do anymore.
No one is brushing it under the carpet. I knew about slavery at school, for example. I also knew that Britain was the first country to actually abolish slavery, right? I think that a lot of the young people coming up now who are learning about slavery probably don't even know that. That's kind of like put to one side. The fact
so if you beat your wife up and then you apply a plaster, we should celebrate the application of the plaster, should we? Come on. You get the analogy, Peter,
Matt,
don't you?
what you are doing, you're sort of saying it's just about being commonsensical, pros and cons, good and bad. We all know that underneath this, particularly when it comes to the attacks on our history, when it comes to Churchill as a symbol of that, the motive is to delegitimise our history, and indeed it is working.
Do you think it's my motive? Do you think it's my motive?
No, not necessarily.
No, well, what do you think my motive is? My motive is the truth.
I think that you are doing their job for them, and you're saying, oh, it's just about seeing the good and the bad. No,
I didn't say it's just about seeing good. I said it's about celebrating. No, I said it is it's celebrating the good and condemning and learning from the bad.
So where does that end? Where does that end?
We'll pause it for there. We'll come back soon. That's Matthew Stadlen, broadcaster and political commentator, and Peter Whittle, director of the New Culture Forum. Before we do move on to the next debate, let's have a look at what you guys have been saying about today's topics. On Remembrance, Michael says, today is a sharp reminder of our yesteryears. My beloved wife, now departed, lost her father in World War II on the Burma Road. So at the age of 9, became a little mum to her younger brothers, while her mother went out to work to put food on the table. A great generation, sadly all gone, but will never be forgotten. Hear, hear, Michael. Very well said. Thank you for that. Bill says, on the pressure to wear a poppy, no one should be obliged to wear a poppy, but there is nothing wrong with feeling obliged to do something. A lot that is wrong with our country is because of the fallacy that people should never feel obliged or have a sense of duty to do anything. That is spot on, Bill. I think it would be nice if people did feel obligated to wear a poppy in remembrance of people who have fallen for us to live today. That's very well said. Nicholas, however, says, whilst not mandatory to wear a poppy, a little acknowledgement of those who gave so much might not go amiss. Here. Sandra goes on to say, remembrance makes me feel that it is very important for the UK to bring back national service. There are so many youngsters now that could benefit from this, particularly boys. I'm sure we all see many boys and young men in particular around us who appear to be lost and cannot get a job. So it's important to get them all together in order to give them purpose. That would be fantastic, Sandra. And not just in the armed forces, but national service in general, community service, etc. Giving people that sense of service and duty and obligation to the community around them, so they're not just all entitled little individualists. Thomas goes on to say, the King wearing ER on his shoulder today to honour his late mother was extremely touching and harkens to the sacrifice of much of her generation. Hear, hear. Thank you very much for those emails. Keep them coming in. Now, a police officer who was thrown from his motorcycle responding to the Just Stop Oil protests on the M25 has thanked the public for their support. The officer is still recovering from the injuries he sustained in a crash after being called to respond to Just Stop Oil activists climbing gantries on the 160-mile London orbital to force road closures. Meanwhile, the group has announced that it is halting the actions on the M25 after anger from opponents who said it was only a matter of time before someone was killed because of their stunts. Do we need harsher punishments for eco-terrorists just like Just Stop Oil? That is the next question. And with me to answer that is Matthew Stadlen, broadcaster and political commentator, and Peter Whittle, director of the New Culture Forum. Peter, what are we going to do about these nutters?
Well, I think that the police should just do their job. You've got to sort of see this in the broader context, I think. The public frustration about it is getting enormous. And, of course, what's going to happen is people are going to take it into their own hands more and more. Yeah. I think that...
Sorry, what do you mean by that?
Well, I think that we've already seen it, whether it's people, dragging people from the road or to stop various different obstructions on the motorway.
You're not encouraging violence, of course.
No, I just said, I think people, well, we're seeing it, people start to do that. I think the police should do their job. That's the first thing I said, Matthew. The problem is that I think increasingly we have a police force which appears to take different attitudes to different causes. And again, going back actually to Remembrance Sunday, in fact, or Remembrance the 11th, when it was on the 11th, a couple of years ago, Extinction Rebellion, as it then was, managed to get right up to the cenotaph. And it managed to stand there on the actual 11th of November for a good 10 to 15 minutes. God knows what they could have done in that time. And there were huge protests about this at the time because, wait a minute, how come that could happen? How come the police could allow that to happen? And yet, similarly with BLM, they were treated, it was treated very, very gently. When it comes to other demonstrations, for example, if you were anti-lockdown, for example, and you went to one of those demonstrations, then pretty much you were kept in order. And I think that there is a kind of selective policing going on now. That is what we've got to look at, because people are looking at this and they're comparing to other countries, say in Europe or whatever, and they're thinking, wait a minute, you're giving them water, you're whatever it is, you're being all nice. At the same time, where people are trying to get to work, they're trying to go about their business. And I think, for me, it is this kind of sort of entitled right that the people seem to have, that somehow or other their motives are so sort of high that somehow anything is allowed, anything is legitimate, and, to hell with everybody else.
Yeah. Matthew, we've already seen a police officer get injured. Do you think things are going to escalate further? Do you think if the police don't step in and actually enforce the law and stop these eco-warriors in what they're doing, average Joe is going to do it for them?
Yeah, first thing, thoughts with the police officer. It's appalling what happened to him. Secondly, I think in the last few days, Just Stop Oil have said that they're going to actually stop for the moment what they've been up to on the M25. Thirdly, I think there's a really interesting question here as to whether these Just Stop Oil protesters will end up being seen like the suffragettes or not. And you guys might balk at that, but there is a climate crisis, there's a climate catastrophe. It could lead to the most...
You believe there is a climate crisis?
No, the science says there's a climate crisis. But could we just park, because we want to talk about Just Stop Oil for a moment, we can debate that endlessly. The science says there is. I think there is a real issue here as to the effect, the impact that these people are having against the risks that they are causing. Would I personally go out and disrupt the M25 and break the law? No. Why? Two reasons. I'd be squeamish about the idea of consequences, such as we've seen with that police officer. Two, because I believe in the rule of law. However, the suffragettes 100 years ago broke the law, and we now treat them as the heroines that they deserve to be. There is a difference because the suffragettes didn't have the vote, and these guys. So that's it. Well, no, it's important, but it's also disingenuous to suggest that we would not be talking about the issues being raised by Just Stop Oil on this show and other shows if they were not doing what they're doing. So, do I think they should break the law? No. Do I think the fact that we're talking about it reflects the fact that they have broken the law? Absolutely, yes. And I think that's true of GBNews, but also my former station, LBC. There's a sense that presenters on these stations, and I was one, love to hate people like Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil because it drives traffic, it drives audiences, it drives clicks.
That's very
so tell me why you want to discuss Just Stop Oil if you think the best thing to do would be to starve them of the oxygen of publicity.
I didn't say it's to start them with publicity.
Why not, though? Why would you not do that? Because that might bring an end to what they're doing.
I think the action is to lock them up, and I don't actually think what they're doing is good, because I don't believe in a climate crisis to begin with. But even if it was...
You don't believe in science, I know that.
No, I believe in science. But when you say the science, as in there is a consensus on this, there is lots and lots of debate going on this, and you are not a scientist, so don't give me...
You can always find a scientist who disagrees with the consensus. By the way, I agree on one thing with Peter, and that is that police should absolutely do their job, and there should not be selective policing, because otherwise the rule of law breaks breaks down.
These people are making demands and they're not engaging in the democratic process because they have that moral superiority, because they believe what they're doing is for a good cause. However, people disagree. And I don't think the general public is on their side. So are these demands worthwhile? Is it going to come to a good means?
No, it's not. And also, I don't really go along with this argument, at least we're talking about it. I mean, you know, you can justify almost any act on the basis of at least we would get to talk about it. I think what strikes me about these people, actually, Karen, it's the level of, as I said, moral superiority coupled with almost a form of demented hysteria. I mean, also, you can't, you know, when you look at it, quite often they're highly privileged people, right? And the people who suffer generally are working class people, going on their way to work, trying to go on their way to work. The police could stop it if they really wanted to. There's not the will to.
Are you not a little bit impressed that people who have a lot to lose are giving up their freedom, and risking years in prison potentially?
What do they have to lose?
Their freedom.
No.
They care so much about something, they're prepared to go to jail. That impresses me.
Matthew, they will be... No, it doesn't impress me
Why
at all.
not?
No, because they have a sense of an over...
Do jihadis?
No, they don't.
Okay.
No, they have comparison.
They have an exaggerated sense.
These people did not go out to injure a police officer.
They're willing to break the law to do it.
And these people, this is non-violent protest. One of the reasons we're talking about it, and rightly, I think that we're talking about it, is because a police officer was injured in attempting to stop these people from breaking the law.
So you do think it's right to talk about this?
No,
after all that hot air about saying this is
I'm just surprised that you think it's right to talk about it, because I would have thought in your position you would want to starve them with the oxygen of publicity.
Listen, someone, or, you know, let's, God forbid it happens, but someone's probably going to get very, very badly hurt soon.
And I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do what they're doing.
The thing is...
But do I have some sympathy for them?
The problem with your position is that you have... Well, yes, but the thing is it's great. So you say, on the one hand this, on the other hand that, and we're left with the situation exactly as it stands now. And the fact is that this is going on, there is not the will to stop it. The police could stop it under all sorts of different laws, not even ones to do with...
Well, they are stopping it. Hundreds of them have been arrested.
It could be public, it could be obstruction. It could be obstruction of the King's Highway. It could be public nuisance, all of these things.
You both. Real quick answer, if you can, please. What should they be doing instead?
These protesters? Yeah. Well, as I say, what I'm doing here is reflecting the facts. In my view, I mean, you could say this is more of an opinion than a fact, but I suspect the reality is the reason we're talking about it is because they're taking extreme measures. So, in other words, if they signed petitions, if they demonstrated outside Parliament, if they did all the sorts of things that I would do, because I'm a law-abiding citizen, there's absolutely no way we would be talking about them.
It sounds like you're endorsing...
Well, no, I would say what they should do, the protesters, they should just do the democratic thing. They should stand for election under the name of Just Stop Oil or whatever it is. Stand for election, do it the way everyone else has to do it. You don't have some God-given right just because you think you are so right.
I think that's an interesting point, because the leader of Just Stop Oil, Roger Hallam, does have a political party called Burning Pink. So he could stand for election if he wanted to do it democratically.
Yes, the thought is terrible.
You could stand against him.
Thank you, we could indeed. I probably would. Matthew Stadlen, broadcaster and political commentator, and Peter Whittle, director of the New Culture Forum. Thank you both very much for that very heated debate. You're watching Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. I'll be back with you after this short break.
So looking ahead then to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking dry in the east, but cloud and rain moving in from the west. Let's home in on the detail. Generally dry and cloudy across the southwest of England, some clearer spells, a band of rain and strong winds in the far west, slowly moving east. Feeling mild though, highs of 15. Remaining dry in the southeast of England, some clear spells in the evening and overnight, winds staying light with some patchy mist and fog later. Then cloudy across most of Wales with some clearer spells in the east, winds increasing at the coast with rain arriving in from the west later. Taking a look at the Midlands, it'll be much cloudier there, particularly in the evening across the region, but staying mostly dry. Some clearer spells at times. Southeasterly winds remaining light, however, it will be breezy over high ground. And remaining cloudy across the northeast with outbreaks of light rain and drizzle, some clearer spells confined to the west, breezy at the coasts, but lighter winds inland. And staying dry across most of southern Scotland. Cloudy in the east, patchy light rain and drizzle at times, breezy at the coasts, particularly in the west. And cloudy, wet and windy across most of Northern Ireland, however drier in the far east, rain continuing to move slowly east through the evening, heavy at times. So dry then with clear spells, mainly in the southeast, but rain sometimes heavy, sometimes slowly eastwards, strong winds in the west.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Co.
Hello and welcome back. This is Calvin's Common Sense Crusade on your TV, radio and online. Coming up this hour, as the Metropolitan Police warns strikes will hurt the war on crime, England LGBTQ+++ fans groups criticises David Beckham over the World Cup role, and are students running scared from debates at university? But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon to you. The top story on GB News. His Majesty King Charles has led the Remembrance Sunday service today for the first time as sovereign, following on from the death of his mother, Queen Elizabeth. Well, both the King and the Prince of Wales laid wreaths of poppies at the Cenotaph in central London this morning. The wreath laid by His Majesty the King, incorporating a ribbon which paid tribute to his late mother and grandfather, King George, using their horse racing colours. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, and former Prime Ministers were also there, as well as 10,000 Royal British Legion veterans representing 300 different members of the armed forces, taking part in a march past to honour the war dead, and a further 10,000 members of the public lining the streets of Whitehall to watch and pay their respects. And the nation fell silent to honour those fallen in the line of duty at 11. A newly renovated Big Ben chiming 11 times at 11 o'clock to mark the start of the nationwide 2-minute silence. And services were held across the country with bells ringing to commemorate all those who lost their lives in past and present conflicts. The Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, also using the occasion to commemorate the fallen and pay tribute to Ukrainians currently fighting for their freedom.
Today is a reminder that we've suffered wars in Europe before, and tens of thousands of British service personnel gave their lives as did civilians to defeat fascism. And here we are again, tragically, decades later, with a war on continental Europe in Ukraine. What Remembrance is about is recognising that freedom isn't free. People make sacrifices. This nation made the ultimate sacrifice on 2 occasions in the Great Wars, but also on other conflicts since, and Remembrance is a time to reflect on that.
Ben Wallace. Well, the Prime Minister, we understand, has taken off to travel to the G20 summit in Indonesia, where he'll be joining other world leaders in calling out Putin's regime over the war in Ukraine. He'll be there saying this year's meeting will not be business as usual, but focusing instead on how countries can work together to solve economic challenges and security problems. President Putin, we understand, will miss the event, sending his Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, instead. Here, the Chancellor has warned there'll be very difficult decisions ahead of his upcoming autumn budget. Jeremy Hunt saying taxes will rise following his statement to the House of Commons on Thursday as he tries to balance the public books. He's thought to be considering a range of options, including an extended freeze on income tax and national insurance. Labour says further austerity is not the way forward. And Ukraine's president has described the fighting in the eastern region of Donetsk as hell. Volodymyr Zelensky praised the country's forces for defending the region in what he says have been fierce daily battles. Meanwhile, celebrations have been continuing in the city of Kherson, which was liberated from Russian control this week. President Zelensky says Moscow destroyed all key infrastructure, however, before leaving, including communications, water supplies and electricity. In the United States, President Joe Biden says he's pleased with the election turnout after Democrats retained a majority control of the Senate in the midterm elections. Senator Catherine Cortez Masto won the election in Nevada, which tipped the balance for the Democrats. They'll now control at least 50 Senate seats, with Vice President Kamala Harris able to break ties in the chamber. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has admitted the results were somewhat disappointing, the anticipated Republican tsunami failing to materialise, but votes are still being counted for the lower house, with Republicans currently in the lead for the House of Representatives. Now, here, the number of migrants who've crossed the English Channel in small boats so far this year has passed the 41,000 mark. GB News understands around 300 migrants were taken to Dover Harbour today after trying the journey across the Channel. Border Force vessels and RNLI lifeboats are also responding to a number of other small boat sightings off the coast. Meanwhile, Downing Street says talks on a deal with France over Channel crossings are in the final stages. And lastly, sport. England have been crowned the T20 Cricket World Cup champions in Melbourne, Australia, after beating Pakistan by 5 wickets. Ben Stokes was England's hero once again, taking them over the line with an over to spare, and the victory marking the second time the team has won the T20 World Cup. They're now the first to hold both global white ball trophies, having won the 50-over World Cup in 2019. Congratulations to them. You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Calvin's next.
Hello and welcome. Here's what's coming up this afternoon. Met Police Chief Sir Mark Rowley has said that he's concerned about the unsustainable demands from health and social care bosses ahead of coordinated walkouts by unions. I'll be asking, are the unions playing politics with people's lives? And the England national team's largest LGBTQ supporters group has suggested that David Beckham should no longer be considered a great ally or placed on a pedestal after becoming a paid ambassador for the Qatar World Cup. Are they right? And later, as the Democrats retain majority control of the US Senate after winning a pivotal race in the state of Nevada, will this stop Trump's presidential bid? And of course, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or by tweeting us at gbnews. Deus Vult. The public are being warned to brace themselves for more disruption to their daily lives as unions are set to ballot even more workers on strike action. Nearly 10,000 NHS workers are to be balloted by Unite in the coming days, and rail passengers are being told they face their worst Christmas ever due to disruption caused in part by strikes. This comes after the president of the Public and Commercial Services Union, which represents civil servants, said the union's key demand was to get the Tories out and usher in a Labour government, as its members approved strike action. So are the unions playing politics with people's lives? To debate this, I am joined by former editor of The Sun, Kelvin MacKenzie, and former advisor to Tony Blair, John McTernan. Thank you both for joining me this afternoon. I'm going to start with you, Kevin. The public have a lot on their plates with the cost of living crisis or the cost of lockdown crisis. So are these unions being selfish by compounding misery on them by striking?
Well, I think you've got to understand the actual quantity of the walkouts that are currently having. I made a small list here. So last Thursday, the not very overworked tube employees, they went out in London, which caused massive disruption. On Monday, the Royal Mail goes out. I mean, why the Royal Mail posters, love them to death. Why are they bothering? I have not the vaguest idea, because we don't even need letters delivered. So on November the 26th, there's 10,000 train drivers going out. Thanks very much, but thanks to what happened with COVID, etc., we could get used to having no trains. Then we've got the same week 70,000 university staff. Then we've got 100,000 civil servants, which covers a whole load of areas, which is some other NHS staff through a unison, I think. And then we've got midwives, ambulance workers, the whole lot. This so reminds me. So when you look at my face, you recognize this is somebody who was actually around in 1979 when Jim Callaghan came up with Crisis, What Crisis? And this is kind of a replica. Now, I understand that inflation is an issue. One of the reasons we had inflation is because the workforce, ridiculously, in my view, were given a huge amount of money not to do a stroke of work for 18 months. What do you expect? You get loads of money and there's no productivity. What happens? You have inflation. Then along comes the energy crisis. It is totally beyond me why 150,000 people making 150 grand a year or more are being given £60 a month as a subsidy. So the government are responsible in some ways of giving free money to people. And therefore, then they say to themselves, I tell you what, this not working lot is fantastic, isn't it? I tell you what we'll do is we'll do some more not working, we'll call it striking. And then when they find out that the world has slightly changed over the last, since 1979, we're not all at the beck and call of 5 million state workers against 25, 26 million private workers who don't have the ability to be able to stop me going to work, etc., or stop me going on the tube, or even, by the way, disgracefully stop me from being treated in a hospital by a nurse, because we don't have those facilities. We have where we are today. And by the way, they are not going to win. That moment has come and gone. That boat has sailed.
All right, thank you, Kelvin. John, I can see you shaking your head throughout that. What do you disagree with what Kelvin's just said?
Well, furlough saved hundreds of thousands of lives and saved millions of jobs. Without the furlough support for us to stay at home and work from home where we could, we would have had a recession caused by the pandemic. And so people are in work now. And I think the problem that people are facing is if you don't have a pay increase of 10% this year, you're getting cut. Your wages are being cut. And public sector workers have had their wages cut year after year after year by this Tory government that we've been in power since 2010. I'm not surprised that they're taking action. And the thing that has changed a lot since the 1970s is not union power, it's labour power, which is there are shortages, massive shortages in the workforce in loads of key areas, right throughout the NHS, through policing, through the rail industry. If there weren't the labour shortages, there wouldn't be so much ability of workers to actually enforce their labour by withdrawing it. And I think that's the problem. The problem is we don't have enough workers to fill all the vacancies. And we know why that is, Brexit.
Well, I mean, we have 5 million people in this country who are available to work, so it's not as if we don't have the people. But Kelvin, can you come back on this? Because John's just told us that furlough saved lives and we would have had a recession if it wasn't for furlough. I thought we were in a recession, and is it not?
By the way, there's an aspect of John's argument I do agree with, which is the labour shortage is actually leading to more militancy, because what they can't normally win, there is a possibility of causing some pain. But the hundreds and millions, in fact, I'm sorry, or the billions that went in COVID payment. So, for instance, a friend of mine's partner, she did no work. She worked for a hotel in central London. She did no work for 18 months. The hotel was over Knightsbridge Way, and she lived in North Surrey. And at the end of 18 months, she had more money in her bank account by doing nothing, right, than she had ever had, in the whole, right, this woman of 52, the whole of her working life. Now, we must expect a reaction to that. And we are getting the reaction. So what it was, right, look, this is pretty natural reaction. If you're getting something for nothing, then you think, I tell you what, we must do all this again. We'll go out on strike and we'll penalise the normal working stiff, and we'll enjoy it because actually, funnily enough, we do have leverage. The only thing I would ask anybody, any member of the trade union movement that happens by mistake to have tuned into GB News, right, would be to say to themselves, remember Wapping and remember the miners. At some stage, the government gets off its knees and fights back. And I think that the nurses who I see NHS Digital today said that their average pay is 40-odd thousand quid a year. So I am literally not going to drop a tear when you get that pensions deal, plus the fact that I just see their latest stats show that on top of their 30-odd days a year off, they take 14 days a year sick. So the nurses know how to pretend to be sick anyway, that's for sure. So I think, come the nurses, I notice, and I do admire, strangely, I admire Labour for saying we're not paying the nurses either. That has been a most surprising and enjoyable reaction, that they have said, yes, they're entitled to something. They're not entitled to 17%.
I do think we have some really hard-working nurses, so I do want to throw that out there, Kelvin. But coming back to you, John, because you mentioned the inflation.
Calvin, they're doing the work that the others that are taking 14 and 20 days on top of 33 days a year off aren't doing. So I feel sorry for them, and I agree with you.
I hear you. John, you mentioned inflation and people having a real-term cut in their pay packet, but everyone's going to have that. Everyone's having a cut in their pay packet right now because of the horrible cost of lockdown crisis that we're in. So is it fair that taxpayers should be funding a 15% pay rise to some sectors when they can't get a pay rise themselves?
So the straightforward thing is what Kelvin said is right. The Labour Party position is Labour does not bargain from opposition or in government directly with health service unions. That's why there's pay review bodies. The pay review bodies are there to strike the balance, to make the agreement on the basis of what can be done in productivity, what can be afforded within the NHS budget, and what is right and fair for nurses. But also, what do we need for recruitment and retention? One of the biggest problems facing the police force is the police forces can't recruit enough people. People aren't willing to do the job at the pay that there is. The solution to that is straightforward, as it should be in teaching or for teaching assistants or the NHS or in journalism. If you can't recruit at the pay you're offering, you have to raise the pay. That's the way the economy works. People go to different jobs. And with labour shortages, which Kelvin and you both agree are there, with those, people have got more choices to move around.
OK, so let's move away from the pay for a second, because the comments by the president of the PCS union surely show that these strikes are about more than just better pay and working conditions, aren't they? I'll start with you, Kevin.
No, look, sorry.
We'll come back to you.
The PCS have always been run by the far left, and they've got an agenda. But that's not why the strike is on. The strike was supported by the members because the members want a pay increase. But I'll let Calvin cover.
Okay.
Well, yes, I mean, it's not the only far left union that wants it. The Fire Brigade Union, absolute shockers. It'd be great news when the Fire Brigade Union go on strike, so that people wouldn't be dying at Grenfell, for instance. I mean, there's some shocking aspects of trade unionism, and the problem is that, so if I am working for a trade unionist, I actually vote for these loonies who get into power in the left, because actually they think that they are able to beat up managements. But actually, they're not beating up managements when you're in state industries. You're actually beating up the taxpayer. Nobody gives a damn about the taxpayer. So the Labour Party hides behind this particular this particular war all the time, saying, well, we're doing our best. We can't control these people. Well, the way to control them is to cut off their pay. Why don't they just not allow union subs to be deducted at source? Why don't we just change that rule right now?
That is a good point, because it used to be taken out of the physical pay packet on the way after receiving your physical wages, didn't it? And now it's just taken electronically, practically without any consent. John, I want to ask you about this civil service strike in order to get rid of the Tory government and input a Labour government. Surely that's crossing the bounds there.
Look, if the PCS members voted for their president, the president's got a political agenda. The strike is an industrial agenda. There's political agendas, industrial agendas. And look, I think the truth is, with half the country saying they want to vote Labour, half the country wants shot at the Tories too. The limping on of the Sunak government is not in anybody's interest, not in the country's interest. It's not in the health service interest, and it for sure isn't in the Tory party's interest. The further they run, the faster they run away from voters, the harder they'll get hit when the election comes.
OK, so are these demands of the strikers completely separate to the agenda of the union bosses? And if so, surely there has to be further transparency between the unions and the ballot members.
Yeah, look, they are separate, because the vote was for the strike, which is about an industrial issue. But because there is such interest in strikes at the moment, because there's a wider militancy, the Labour agenda is at the centre of the news again. You're going to get newspapers, journalists asking PCS officials, PCS elected presidents, what they think about things now. I mean, it's the nature of the news, and so you get the opinion. If you have a bully pulpit, you use it, and I'm not surprised the PCS president wants to get shot of the Tory government. That's actually what most of the country are saying at the moment. So it makes them a pretty average British person rather than anybody quite extreme.
Well, chaps, if you ask me, this gives Rishi Sunak a mandate to finish the job that Thatcher started and really cut those unions down to size. But thank you both for joining me today. I really do appreciate it. That was former editor of The Sun, Kelvin McKenzie, and former advisor to Tony Blair, John McTernan.
Thank you very much.
Plenty more to come this afternoon on my Common Sense Crusade. After the break, the England national team's largest LGBTQ++ supporters group has suggested that David Beckham should no longer be considered a great ally or placed on a pedestal after becoming a paid ambassador for the Qatar World Cup. Are they right? But first, a short break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
Welcome back to Common Sense Crusade on GB News, on TV, online and on your wireless. It's exactly 1 week until the controversial FIFA World Cup in Qatar kicks off. And David Beckham has come under fire from the LGBT community football groups over his involvement as a World Cup ambassador. The Gulf nation is notorious for its harsh treatment of homosexuals and record of human rights abuses. The former England captain is not the only one to have come under fire for his participation in the World Cup. Gary Neville has also faced a backlash for accepting a punditry role with Qatari state broadcaster beIN Sports, despite condemning how the Gulf state treated migrant workers. Joining me now is broadcaster Sam Dowler. Sam, I understand you've got a lot to say on this. Let's start with David Beckham. Do you think, first of all, that he was right to take the role?
Well, this was a role that came about last year, and I mean, there are so many different reports. Some say he's got 150 million out of it. Some say 75 million. But let's, you've got to boil things down here. We have to remember that football is about money, and and FIFA made it is no secret that Qatar had no football team, they had no infrastructure, but somehow they got the World Cup. And here we are with supposedly LGBTQ ally David Beckham. Also, he's married to a Spice Girl. They have terrible human rights. They treat their women terribly. And she's all girl power. And yet he's cashing in on something. So I don't know whether he wants to make a statement about saying how he's going to give half of it away to charity. But at the moment, it looks terrible on David Beckham.
But this is the problem, isn't it? All these footballers, they're going out there, they're receiving a lot of money. I didn't realise it was 75 million to 100 million pounds. That is outstanding. But of course, that's the reason they're going, and it's the price of their principles. We saw the same with both Garys. But is that unexpected? It's money, it's football, it's a game. Should they really make it about values?
Yeah, I get it. It's a game, but FIFA have made no secret of trying to kick out racism from the game. They've tried to kick out homophobia from the game as well. They make massive statements about that, and obviously we know that homophobia and racism are rife within football. So it's much more than that. And we know, I'm not a particular massive fan of football myself, but I have friends who are obsessed. I have friends who work within the football sector. I mean, this is huge. It's not just about a game. Of course it isn't. And to take the World Cup, which everybody watches, which everybody loves. I mean, I do watch the World Cup because I find it fascinating. But to take it to a country where it's alleged maybe 6,000 migrants died, getting paid like £1 a day, whatever, to build this infrastructure that they didn't have to begin with. What's going on? And then you have a video of David Beckham, a stopover in Qatar, making it look like the most beautiful place in the world. I mean, it certainly isn't the most beautiful place in the world for a lot of people, and a lot of people that as well, David Beckham, that wouldn't have a great time there.
Well, that's just it, isn't it? We know it's an atrocious place. We know the human rights record, not just historically, but involved in building the infrastructure for the World Cup. So I don't think anyone can go over there and still claim the moral high ground. So do you think it's right for the LGBT lobbies and communities to say, actually, you're no longer an ally, David Beckham?
Well, I mean, David Beckham's in a precarious position because we know that he's chasing that knighthood, and he had a bit of a wobble with the whole email scandal, but he scraped it back with queuing up for standing in queue for the Queen. But here we are again, another problem. And and it's again just to do with money. And he hasn't spoken about it. He hasn't spoken out about LGBTQ rights. He hasn't spoken about the rights of women in Qatar either. Is he gagged by the Qatar government? Let's find out. You can't basically say that you're an ally to women or to gay people and then and take money from a government like Qatar.
Or to workers in general. I think you're absolutely right there. So thank you very much. Broadcaster Sam Dowler, thanks for your time this afternoon.
Thanks.
Now, we did reach out to Beckham's team, but they are yet to respond, surprisingly. Before we move on today, let's have a look at what you guys have been saying on today's topics. On the importance of remembrance, Tom says, "Today I pay tribute to all who have died in wars, but I feel very deeply for the million who suffered and died in World War I, an atrociously cruel conflict. Many of those poor lads never had a chance." Absolutely, Tom, and it's so important that we remember them every year, year in, year out, for the sacrifice that they made for us. Mark on Just Stop Oil protests says, "Police should be impartial and not be embroiled in gender politics and have a soft approach to woke issues. They are there to uphold the king's peace and protect life and deter and detect crime." Yes, no to a two-tiered approach to policing, Mark. You're spot on. They should just enforce the law and prevent crime. It's a basic job, isn't it? Gary says, "To link the suffragettes with these morons is crackers." That was in relation to a comment that Matthew Stadler made earlier. "The women were fighting for their rights. Just Stop Oil is attacking our society for an end that is not settled. There are plenty of scientists who do not support this climate madness." And that is, Gary, thank you for raising that, because so many people say, but it's the science, as if it's established. This is still a heavily contested debate, and I've seen that many, many scientists do not support this climate crisis, although they do support climate change, and there's different nuances to it. So we have to take that on board. We cannot just assume there is one direct approved narrative. That would be incorrect. Angie says, "Of course, all these strikes are political to get the government out of office. The unions are unbelievably selfish, demanding outrageous wage rises that are paid from the taxes of workers who will get much lower wage rises. Higher wage rises will fuel inflation, put up prices, and lead to job losses. No public service workers should be able to strike, and their reasons for striking are getting weaker by the strike." Exactly. So this is the problem with it. They make it sound like it's about money. They make it sound like it's about being fair and just. They deserve more money because they're working really hard, but it's actually about politics. When they come out and say, we want to get rid of the Tory government and put a Labour government in place, that is the civil servants going above and beyond their pay grade. They should be politically neutral. They should not be making political statements like that. It's inappropriate. But anyway, you are with GB News on TV, radio and online. And we're going to have a short break now, so I'll see you shortly.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak. Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade on GB News, on TV, online and on your digital radio. A recent talk by the SDP party leader William Clouston at the University of York was met with fierce protests by the LGBT group on campus, surprisingly. However, the protest came as something of a surprise to him, given that William Clouston was giving a talk on international trade and industrial policy. The LGBTQ+ network urged students to boycott the talk due to the SDP's firm stance on the protection of biological sex-based rights, ignoring the fact that Roy Jenkins was one of the co-founders of the SDP, introduced the Sexual Offences Act in 1967, which decriminalised homosexuality in England and Wales. What a mess. Joining me now is SDP leader William Clouston. William, you were giving a talk on what, industrialisation, and they boycotted you because of your stance on same-sex issues? Break it down for me, because it just makes no sense.
It was a little bit curious, Calvin. Yeah, I'd agreed to the guest of the York University Free Speech Society to give a talk on industrial policy and economics and international trade. So I was a little bit surprised when the LGBTQ+ network took against the talk and started agitating and organised a boycott. And this was slightly curious anyway. And then it didn't end there. I mean, the university, to be fair, defended us and put on extra security. Okay. And we were determined the talk should go ahead. But obviously it had a few effects. I mean, for one, I think fewer people turned up to that evening than would have done. I mean, who would want to turn up on a Thursday night to be met with insults for attending a meeting on industrial policy and tariff reform?
Yeah, and I'm guessing that you would have welcomed the chance to debate these protesting students anyway.
Of course. I mean, actually, Calvin, that's the real sadness in all of this, is that, I was giving the lecture, and inside the lecture hall, you could hear shouting outside and agitation. And I think that's very sad, because the people agitating should have been inside the hall. I would have been very happy to debate them. They could have asked me any question they like. I think the curious thing is that the whole thing is rather driven by fear. I mean, we're reasonable people. I mean, they did defame me on social media, which I've written to the York University Vice Chancellor to complain about that. And I think that will have a chilling effect on visiting speakers. I mean, you'd expect a visiting speaker to university to be dealt with, pleasantly and courteously. And I think that'll have a chilling effect. Who would turn up if that's going to happen? But more than that, Calvin, as I say, I would have liked to have debated them. And I think we're reasonable people. We do have quite a firm policy on trans ideology. It's actually a very humane and decent policy, I think. In any case, I mean, if you're and some students were given to calling us fascists online, which again, I mean, is actually quite comical. If they can't tell the difference between a social democrat and a fascist, then perhaps they need they should be repaid their £9,000 tuition fee.
It's fascinating, because you are actually on the centre left, and to be calling you a fascist doesn't make sense, but it's actually their attitudes that are quite fascist in wanting to shut you down before you even get to speak. But there's no self-awareness there. I was at Cambridge Union the other day, William, and I was debating on should this House give reparations, and I was, of course, on the opposition. And the attitude from the students, the immaturity, the giggling, the screeching, the gasping, they were just entirely uncomfortable with a view that opposed their own view. And I'm like, this is the purpose of a debate. You're supposed to hear both sides and then you make your mind up, but they don't want to hear both sides. Do you think that we've reached a point in universities where they cannot comfortably engage with different perspectives?
Yeah, and I saw the clips actually of your talk at the Cambridge Union. I thought it was pathetic. I mean, these people should listen to an opposing speaker, and debate with them. I think most of it is, as I say, it's to do with fear. The real reason they don't want to debate is that they think they might lose the debate. I mean, as I say, our policy on this particular issue they were concerned with is a very reasonable policy. We took advice from trans members of the SDP. We consulted academics. We had a good look at it, and it's a very fair policy. And I think, honestly, the reason they didn't want to debate on that and turn up was because they probably lose the debate, because I think we have some very good arguments on our side. I mean, I think there's a wider question here, Calvin, as to what a university is for. And I think a university should be the type of place where if someone has a different view to another person, the reaction should be, okay, that's very interesting. Why do you think that? Let's talk about it. But instead, they've created this awful atmosphere of sort of fear and shouting and all the rest of it. And that's just the enemy of trying to get at free inquiry and truth. It's exactly the opposite of what a university should be.
Well, my friend Colin Brazier always says we should get back to first principles, and I'm with him on that, but I don't know if we can, because they put emotions over facts. They're disregarding the Enlightenment principles. For me, I'd chase universal truth from a Christian perspective, from Jesus Christ, but even if you're a secular person, the Enlightenment shows that we should be looking for an objective truth, but they don't believe in that anymore. So how do we break it down to first principles if they don't believe in facts because they're so worried about their fear and their emotions?
Exactly. I mean, I've done a number of different courses at university, first town planning and then surveying, and then latterly philosophy at Durham. And it's 12 years ago since I completed that degree. But to be honest, then, I mean, things must have changed, because the atmosphere then was pretty much as I described. You know, if you have to take a different position on something, let's discuss it. The other thing that's a major problem is just calling people names. It's ridiculous. I mean, why? I've got a thick skin. I lead a political party. I think it's right for me to complain to the Vice-Chancellor, because I think it's wrong for visiting speakers to be treated like this. But I think, it's not on. I want to debate. I mean, some people, Ed West has quite an interesting theory on this. He says that basically, obviously, you've got this hyper-liberal, progressive culture washing over universities now. And actually, universities, he said, are going back to their original purpose of basically indoctrination. I mean, in the Middle Ages, universities weren't places of freedom of thought and inquiry. They were there to sort of put a doctrine into you, and that's what we've sort of returned to. Well, I hope not, because they're not doing their job.
No, I agree. Do you think social media has a part to play in all of this?
I think it does. I think it's very easy. I think that's the saddest thing of all. When people were shouting outside the lecture theatre, I wanted them inside. And I said to the organisers, the Free Speech Society, I said, should I go round and just say, look, come in? And of course, the fear and all the security and all the rest of it means that you can't do that. Partly, it sounds ridiculous. I'm a perfectly reasonable person. They didn't want me to get into trouble for going up to them and just saying, look, come in and debate us, please. But they didn't want that. That's the saddest thing of all. They didn't want to debate with anyone. And it's through argument and debate and courteous, civilized discussion that we find things out. And they didn't want to find anything out.
I've been arguing in favour of free speech for a long time, as you know, William. But the thing I come up against, and I'm sure you've come up against it too, is that they think that we want to have free speech in order to be hateful, to put forward hateful views. How do we get across to people we want free speech in order to have a free and open, transparent debate and to actually come to the nuance in the conversation and find common ground? How do we let people know that other opinions are not necessarily hateful just because you don't share them?
Yeah, I mean, I reject that idea entirely. I mean, there's nothing. Well, this is the slightly comical thing. The university sent me 3 sets of equality, diversity, and safety at work bits of advice that I had to sign up to, and I happily signed up to them. I felt fairly confident that my views on tariff reform and trade were not going to breach any rules, and of course they didn't. But in any case, they wouldn't have done, even if I debated the people that were protesting me on their terms. I would have been very happy to. I don't actually think we can make any progress until the people who are causing this problem and shouting instead of debating have the decency to actually turn up in good faith, because it's all about good faith, Calvin. Yes. Turn up in good faith and actually speak to us and realise that we are entirely reasonable, and we don't just make policy off the cuff. We've thought about these things, and we have a reasonable. On this issue, I think women's rights are important. I think there are some sex-based rights that need defending in sport and in changing rooms and in women's prisons and so on. I think I could make the case fairly reasonably, but they didn't want to hear it.
No, they don't. And I often talk about the silent majority in society who feel that a very loud vocal minority is pushing their agenda on people. But actually in the universities, I think it's the other way around. I think it's a very quiet minority. They've become the minority. And, you know, after my debate, lots of people came up and said, I agreed entirely with what you said. I'm like, well, why did you not stand up, make a floor speech, say, yes, this is a point, use evidence, like debate. That's what the debating hall is for. How do you think, encourage and strengthen people in their convictions so that the quiet majority is no longer quiet and doesn't become a quiet minority?
I think it's possibly on the turn. I think I'm going to be an optimist on this. Remember that the people that protested this event were quite a small minority. I think Julie Bindel had 150 people protesting her speaking at York the previous year. I didn't quite get that. Perhaps tariff reform wasn't quite as interesting. But the point is that the majority of undergraduates are probably quite sensible and just don't have this view. And funnily enough, I spoke in Canterbury yesterday at an SDP meeting, and one of the local academics turned up, and he was saying, actually, students are fed up with this now. They pay their fees, they want to learn something in the 3 or 4 years they're at the university. And he said the tide is actually turning. And I think he may be right. We've just got to, in a way, it's the same as Jonathan Haidt says. You've got to give the sensible majority, even in universities, the confidence just to speak up. And hopefully they'll find that.
I came away thinking the next generation is lost, but I like your approach much better, William. You've got more optimism there and hope for the next generation. So we'll leave it at that, I think. That's SDP leader William Clouston. Thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. We unite across faiths, cultures and backgrounds to remember the service and sacrifice of the armed forces community from Britain and the Commonwealth. We will remember them. Anna Riley, our GB News Yorkshire and Humber reporter, has been speaking to veterans who served on D-Day about what remembrance signifies to them.
That the vast convoy should sail unharmed to the coast of France was the Royal Navy's determination. The greatest amphibious operation of all time was got underway.
The D-Day landings marked the start of the Allied liberation of Northern Europe and hailed the beginning of the end of the Second World War. Some 156,000 British, American and Canadian forces landed in Normandy, and Yorkshire veteran Jack Mortimer was one of them, helping secure freedom for the world when he was just 20 years old. Now at 99, Jack recalls how he drove as a dispatch driver carrying ammunition with 12th Ordnance Beach Detachment and landed on Sword Beach as shells and mortar flew overhead.
It was noisy, it was smelly. There were heavy guns, and the big ships in the channel were firing over. There was shells screaming all over the top of us, and but it seemed that I've often thought about it, that everybody seemed to know what they had to do. Everybody of the 130,000, I think, something like that, knew exactly what to do, and all these little bits put together made a great big push, which of course eventually freed France from Nazi Germany.
But the success of the landings weren't without their losses, with more than 9,000 casualties amongst the Allies. Jack counts himself lucky that he wasn't among them.
I'm proud of being a D-Day veteran. I'm proud of my medals, really. Being a D-Day veteran doesn't mean that you're any kind of hero, because there are 130,000 heroes, really. And the only heroes are, as I say, and I've said before, I'm grateful to be alive, grateful to have survived. So sorry so many had to die, but so many heroes, and there they lie in Normandy.
Jack is supported by the Royal British Legion, and for him, Remembrance Sunday is a time to thank those who gave away their tomorrow so that we can have our today.
Thousands gave their lives for the country, and we should remember that they gave their all, they gave their lot because of to help to free the world of tyranny.
Medals of honour for Jack, who wants no one to forget the sacrifices his comrades made. Anna Riley, GB News, Leeds.
Thank you, Anna. How lovely. Now, before we move on to today's next topic, let's have a look at what you guys have had to say, what we've been talking about so far. Virginia on Beckham says, leave him alone. He's promoting football, not Qatar. It's the Islamic regime that governs the country. Why won't anyone say so? We are saying so. It is the Islamic regime that runs the country, and that's considered a bad thing. Marcus on Just Stop Oil's right to protest says, the public have been bombarded with eco messages for years. Just Stop Oil has merely climbed on the bandwagon and has given it a new twist of extreme antisocial behaviour, showing total contempt for the public. They must know that if they achieved their goals in the UK, it would make no difference to pollution. If they were sincere, they would pursue their antics somewhere else like China. As it is, they are indulging their arrogant self-righteousness whilst taking advantage of this country's nonsensical softness. Marcus, thank you for that. Well put. Nonsensical softness does seem to be the culture of the day, unfortunately. I wish we'd get back to some more solid stoicism. On Remembrance, Matt says, I pay tribute to Winston Churchill today. He fought off the forces of fascism so that we could have the rights and freedoms we enjoy today. He would be proud that we still mark Remembrance Sunday. I agree with you entirely, which is one of the reasons he's in our sting. He's in that intro graphic that you see quite a lot. He is a hero of the nation and he's a hero of the world. Without him, fascism would have won. We should never forget that. Win on dealing with protests says, why can't we use anti-terrorist legislation and know your customer banking legislation to stop the funding of Just Stop Oil? It's not a charity. It is funded by the loony, wokey Californian heiress Eileen Getty, who inherited millions from her oil baron grandfather Paul. Forget the supine police, set HMRC onto them. I don't know if it is the Gettys funding Just Stop Oil, but I do know they've received £10 million in donations. You can check their status on Companies House. They need a lot more looking into, I'll give you that much. Going back to Remembrance Sunday, Ash says, I still find it incredible that King George V of Great Britain, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia were cousins who had a family falling out and decided to have a war to solve their issues. The result, millions of dead, lest we forget. I'm sure that's an oversimplification, Ash, but I thank you for your contribution anyway. The American midterms produced a disappointing result for the Republicans as the anticipated red wave failed to materialize. The Democrats will keep control of the Senate after a projected crucial win in Nevada. The results have cast doubt over former President Donald Trump's chances of re-election in 2024, with many now looking to the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, as the party's best hope for winning the 2024 presidential election. So can Trump pull off his great comeback? With me now is the founder and editor of Compact Magazine, Sohrab Ahmari. Sohrab, I've been an admirer of yours for a long time. Your book, From Fire by Water, on your conversion to the Catholic faith was fantastic. So first of all, thank you for that, and thank you for joining me today. Could you start us off by telling us the latest results from the US midterms?
Thanks for having me, Calvin. And I also likewise have admired you from afar and look forward to meeting you in person one day. More bad news coming in for the Republicans. The upshot is basically that on the House, the lower chamber of Congress, they'll maybe barely hold on to or win a majority. On the Senate side, it seems almost certain that the Democrats will clinch a majority. Arizona and Nevada, which were two very closely watched races, fell into the Democrats' hands with disappointing results for the GOP. So, as you said, what was touted as a coming red wave turned out to be a red fizzle, or a tiny bit of water.
It seems to me to be becoming a bit of a civil war in the Republican Party, with Trump calling Ron DeSantis desanctimonious, and we're seeing that DeSantis did really well, but a lot of Trump's candidates actually plummeted and didn't do too well. So, who do you back these days? Because I know you wrote a piece for Compact about how you backed Donald Trump for 2024. Do you still stand by that?
Well, I still stand by Trump insofar as he represents what I think was the populist strain in the Republican Party that arose in 2015-16 and represented a wider transatlantic movement. Similar movement was Brexit. All of these essentially questioning the neoliberal economic consensus, free trade, the loss of manufacturing, the heartlands of the West, the sort of disempowerment of labor unions and workers and low wages. That's what Trump was responding to, and it's what Brexit was kind of attempting to address as well. So insofar as that goes, I worry that what comes next after Trump will not be that kind of right-wing populism, if you will. It'll be a return to the pre-Trump model, which was essentially like low taxes, pro-business policy. The problem with that is that that doesn't motivate enough Americans. It certainly doesn't motivate the working class base of the Republican Party anymore. And I'd argue it doesn't motivate the working class base of the Tories in Britain either, insofar as they have one. And so what is the Republican Party going to go back to? I worry it's going to be a kind of, again, that same old, free trade, low tax, anti-worker agenda, but covered over with this sort of culture war rhetoric. And what 2022, the midterms showed us more than anything, is that's done enough to excite enough people, enough voters, especially, again, working class voters, to come out to the polls. Just culture war, we're against masking kids, we're against gender ideology in schools. I share all that. I share the revulsion of what happened, for example, with the COVID regime. But the formula that was tried in this election was, we're just going to talk about that stuff without offering a broader economic vision for the country. And that did not, as I said, it did not motivate people to come out, whereas the Democrats, they know how to reward their various constituencies, for example, younger people with student loan forgiveness and so forth, and they did much better.
So, Rob, I haven't got much time, so it's going to have to be a yes or no answer, but do you think Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump could work together on the campaign?
Possibly. That's a very hard answer. Possibly.
Thank you so much for your time. I could talk to you all day, but I'm out of time, so thank you so much, Sir Rob Amari, for that analysis on the US.
Thanks.
Now, before I go, I do want to read the collect for today on Remembrance Sunday. Almighty God, stretch forth your mighty arm to strengthen and protect the armed forces. Grant that meeting danger with courage and all occasions with discipline and loyalty, they may truly sense the cause of justice and peace. Let us also remember before God and commend to his safekeeping those who have died for their country in war, and all who have lived and died in the service of the peoples of the world. To the honour of your holy name, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. You have been watching Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, Calvin Robinson. I'll be back next Sunday at 2 p.m. Nana Okoye is up next. God bless and Deus Vult.
So looking ahead then to this evening's weather, and the UK's